The conference hall of the Galactic Council stretched 3 kilometers in diameter, a marvel of crystalline architecture that had witnessed first contact with over 200 species. Today, Ambassador Gavalix of the Zentari Empire stood at the entrance, his 4 arms clasped in the traditional greeting pose, waiting for humanity's arrival. The signal had come from Earth 5 cycles ago. A simple mathematical sequence, proof of intelligent life. The Council had responded with cautious optimism. New species always brought fresh perspectives, new technologies, and different ways of thinking. In the 10,000 years since the Council's founding, not once had a species proven incompatible with galactic civilization. Gavalix watched as the human ship descended through the atmospheric shields. It was smaller than expected, sleek and efficient. The airlock hissed open, and 5 humans emerged. They walked on 2 legs, had 2 arms, and faces that seemed almost pleasant to look at. Not beautiful by Zentari standards, but not disturbing either. Unremarkable, really. The lead human stepped forward. She had dark hair pulled back from her face and wore a simple blue garment that the translation database identified as a suit. Her lips curved upward in what the database called a smile. "Greetings," she said, her voice carrying easily across the hall. "I am Ambassador Sarah Chun, representing the United Earth Government. We come in peace and friendship, hoping to join the community of civilized worlds." Standard first contact words. Every species said something similar. Gavalix relaxed slightly and gestured for his seers to begin their work. The seers were members of the Thaluxi species, telepaths who could read intent and emotion with perfect clarity. They served as the Council's truth keepers, ensuring that no species could hide hostile purposes or deceive the others. It was impossible to lie to a seer. Every species learned this quickly. 3 seers approached the human delegation, their crystalline eyes beginning to glow with the soft blue light of active scanning. Gavalix had seen this ritual hundreds of times. The seers would confirm the species' peaceful intent, identify any cultural misunderstandings that needed addressing, and then the formal welcome would begin. The first seer reached toward Ambassador Chan's mind. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the seer stumbled backward, his glow flickering wildly. The second seer gasped, and the third made a sound that Gavalix had never heard from a Thaluxi before, something like a whimper of fear. "Ambassador Gavalix," the lead seer said, his voice shaking. "We must speak privately, now." Chun's smile never wavered. "Is something wrong? I hope we haven't caused any offense." Her tone seemed genuinely concerned. Her body language suggested openness and confusion. But the seers were backing away from her, and that had never happened before. Gavalix made a quick decision. "Please, honored guests, allow me a moment to consult with my colleagues. A simple procedural matter, I assure you. Refreshments will be brought to you immediately." He guided the 3 seers into an adjacent chamber, sealing the door behind them. The moment they were alone, the lead seer turned to him with wild eyes. "They are not what they seem," the seer said. "Ambassador Gavalix, in all my centuries of service, I have never encountered anything like this." The human female, the one called Chun, when I touched her mind, I felt... He struggled for words. I felt kindness, genuine warmth, a sincere desire for friendship and cooperation. Gavalix frowned. "That sounds ideal. Why the distress?" Because underneath that kindness, existing in the same moment and the same thought, I felt calculation. Cold, ruthless evaluation of how to exploit us. I felt her weighing our weaknesses, considering how to manipulate the Council's rules to humanity's advantage. And beneath even that, I felt the capacity for terrible violence should it become necessary. The second seer spoke up. "It is not that she hides her darker thoughts beneath her pleasant words, Ambassador. Both exist simultaneously. She genuinely means her offer of friendship, and she genuinely plans to deceive us if needed. Both are true for her at the same time. That's impossible, Kvalik said. A mind cannot hold contradictory truths without cognitive dissonance. Every species struggles with this limitation. Not humans, the third seer whispered. I scanned the others. They are all the same. Every single human carries within them this duality. They can be kind and cruel in the same heartbeat. They can speak truth and deception with the same breath. They can commit atrocities while genuinely believing they are doing good. Kalix felt his blood cooling, a Zantari sign of deep concern. You are saying they can lie to themselves? More than that, the lead seer said. They can believe multiple contradictory things simultaneously. They can justify anything to themselves. I looked deeper, Ambassador, into their species' history encoded in her memories. I saw wars where millions died, and both sides believed they were righteous. I saw systematic elimination of their own kind, done by people who thought they were heroes. I saw cruelty beyond measure, all committed by individuals who saw themselves as good. The room fell silent. Kvalix tried to process this information. Every species in the galaxy had evolved past such self-deception. It was a survival trait that disappeared once a species reached the stars. The ability to see oneself clearly was considered fundamental to advanced civilization. What do you recommend? Kvalix finally asked. The lead seer's crystalline eyes dimmed. I do not know, Ambassador. If we refuse them entry to the council, they will ask why. And if we tell them the truth, they will not understand. They will think we are judging them unfairly, because they cannot see what we see. Each of them believes they are good, kind, worthy. And in a way, they are. But they are also capable of evil beyond what any council species could contemplate, because they can commit that evil while maintaining their self-image as heroes. Tvolix turned to stare at the door. Beyond it, 5 humans waited patiently, probably making small talk with the attendants, being charming and diplomatic. Ambassador Chen was likely smiling that pleasant smile, meaning every friendly word she said while simultaneously calculating how to best position humanity for maximum advantage. We need to call an emergency council session, Kovalik said quietly. Every species needs to know what we are dealing with. Because if we accept them, we are inviting something unprecedented into our civilization. We are embracing a species that wears the face of goodness while carrying the capacity for limitless evil. And they genuinely cannot tell the difference. The seers nodded in agreement, but their crystalline forms seemed dimmed, as if the encounter had drained something vital from them. As they prepared to face the council, Kvalix realized that humanity's arrival had already changed everything. The question was no longer whether to accept them, but whether the galaxy could survive contact with a species that had perfected the art of being evil with a human face. The emergency council session lasted 3 days. Representatives from 47 species gathered in the Great Chamber, listening to the seer's report with growing unease. Ambassador Chun and her delegation waited patiently in their quarters, unaware of the debate raging about their fate. Some council members argued for immediate rejection. The Kovati delegate, a massive insectoid being, stood before the assembly and declared that any species capable of such self-deception was fundamentally incompatible with galactic civilization. Others, like the gentle Marasi, suggested that humanity simply needed guidance and education to overcome their psychological limitations. Kvalix listened to both sides, but he knew the decision would ultimately come down to the Praetorian test. Every species seeking council membership had to pass it. The test was simple in concept but difficult in execution. A species must demonstrate their ability to negotiate peace with a hostile rival civilization in a controlled simulation. Most species managed to delay war but rarely prevented it entirely. The test measured diplomatic skill, cultural understanding, and commitment to peaceful resolution. On the fourth day, Ambassador Chun was summoned before the council. Kavalix watched her enter the chamber with that same pleasant smile, showing no signs of stress despite days of unexplained waiting. If anything, she seemed more relaxed than before. Ambassador Chen, Kavalix began, choosing his words carefully. The council has decided to proceed with the standard evaluation process. You and your delegation will participate in the Praetorian test. Do you understand what this entails? Chun nodded. We've reviewed the historical records you provided. A diplomatic simulation designed to test our commitment to peaceful resolution. We're ready to begin whenever the council wishes. Her confidence was unsettling. Every species approached the test with nervousness, knowing their future depended on their performance. Chun acted as if it were a minor formality. The simulation began the next morning. The scenario was standard. Humanity would play the role of a newly contacted species caught between two warring civilizations, the Draxi and the Kalathi. Both sides would demand humanity choose an ally. Both would threaten consequences for neutrality. Historical data showed that 60% of species eventually chose a side, leading to simulated war. 30% attempted neutrality and were destroyed by both sides. Only 10% found alternative solutions, usually through creative diplomacy. Chun split her delegation into two teams. She would lead public negotiations while her colleague, a man named David Torres, would handle what she called alternative channels. Valix noted the term with suspicion, but said nothing. The simulation would reveal all. The first week proceeded normally. Chun met with both Draxi and Kalathi representatives, listening to their grievances, proposing mediation, suggesting compromise. Her diplomatic skills were impressive. She seemed genuinely empathetic to both sides, finding common ground where none appeared to exist. The seers monitoring the simulation reported that she meant every word of sympathy she offered. But Torres and his team were doing something else entirely. Kavalix watched through the monitoring systems as they made secret contact with dissident factions within both civilizations. Torres offered weapons to Draxi rebels, then leaked information about those weapons to Kalathi security forces, making it look like the Draxi government was arming terrorists. He spread false intelligence reports suggesting that both sides were planning surprise attacks. He bribed officials, blackmailed leaders, and orchestrated a series of accidents that eliminated moderate voices on both sides. Within the simulation, both the Draxi and Kalathi civilizations began to fracture. Hardliners gained power. Civil unrest grew, all while Ambassador Chun continued her public peace negotiations, expressing deep concern about the growing instability and offering humanitarian aid. The council watched in horror as they began to understand the strategy. The humans were not trying to prevent war between the two civilizations. They were engineering internal conflicts that would tear both sides apart from within. On day 20 of the simulation, the Draxi government collapsed into civil war. 3 days later, the Kalathi military staged a coup, leading to a brutal purge. By day 30, both civilizations were so consumed by internal conflicts that they forgot about their rivalry entirely. They each reached out to Ambassador Chun, begging for human assistance in stabilizing their societies. Chun appeared before both sides via separate communications, her face a mask of compassionate concern. She offered aid, protection, and guidance. In exchange, both civilizations agreed to human oversight of their governments, essentially making them protectorates. The war was over. Peace had been achieved, and humanity had emerged as the dominant power in the simulation, despite having no military force and no prior relationship with either side. The simulation ended. Valix stood in stunned silence as the results were calculated. By every metric, humanity had achieved the best outcome in the test's 5,000-year history. 0 casualties from direct conflict. Both civilizations preserved. Lasting peace established. The numbers were perfect, but the method was monstrous. Chun entered the council chamber, still smiling. "I hope our performance was satisfactory," she said. "We believe that true peace requires not just ending wars, but addressing the root causes of conflict. Sometimes that means helping societies transform from within." "You destroyed them," the Korvathi delegate hissed. "You manipulated, deceived, and orchestrated the downfall of their governments." Chen's expression showed genuine confusion. "We helped them find peace." Both civilizations were locked in a cycle of hatred that would have led to mutual destruction. We gave them a chance to rebuild, to become better versions of themselves. Yes, the process was difficult, but the outcome speaks for itself. They're at peace now. They're grateful. They've asked for our continued friendship. You made them dependent on you, Valak said quietly. You engineered their collapse so they would have no choice but to accept human dominance. We created stability, Chung corrected, and her voice carried absolute conviction. Ambassador Gvalix, I understand this may look harsh from the outside, but our species learned long ago that the most effective way to end a war is to win it before the first shot is fired. We prevented millions of deaths. We gave both civilizations a path forward. If that required some creative diplomacy and strategic intervention, then so be it. The ends justify the means when the alternative is genocide. There it was again. That absolute certainty. That unshakable belief in her own righteousness. The seers had been right. Chen genuinely believed every word she was saying. She had orchestrated the destruction of 2 civilizations and saw herself as their savior. The council chamber erupted into arguments. Some species declared humanity too dangerous for membership. Others pointed to the undeniable success of their strategy. The debate raged for hours, but Galactic barely heard it. He was watching Chun's face, seeing the patient smile of someone who knew they had already won, because she had. The test results were perfect. The council had no official grounds for rejection, and humanity had demonstrated exactly what they were capable of. When given a problem to solve. As the session ended without resolution, Galactic approached Chun privately. You knew we would be horrified, he said. You knew we would see your methods as manipulative and cruel. Yet you proceeded anyway. Why? Chen's smile softened, becoming almost sad. Because, Ambassador, we learned something important in our history. Being good is not the same as being nice. Sometimes saving lives requires doing things that look evil to outsiders. We're willing to be the villains in someone else's story if it means fewer people die. Can you say the same? Before Galactic could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the station. A council aide rushed into the chamber, his face pale with fear. The Cavrish, the aide gasped. They've crossed into council space. The invasion has begun. Chun's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Something cold and calculating. And in that moment, Galactic realized that humanity's test had only just begun. The Cavrish were unlike anything the galaxy had faced before. They were not biological beings, but a machine consciousness, vast and distributed across millions of processing nodes. They had emerged from beyond the galactic rim 3 months ago, sweeping through outer systems with terrifying efficiency. Galactic stood in the war room, watching holographic displays show the extent of the disaster. 17 council worlds had fallen in the first 2 weeks. The Cavrish analyzed every defense, predicted every tactical response, and countered with perfect precision. They fought with pure logic, calculating probability matrices faster than biological minds could process. The Council's greatest. Military minds had tried everything. Traditional fleet engagements failed because the Cavrish predicted optimal formations and countered them before ships could even fire. Surprise attacks failed because the Cavrish calculated the probability of such tactics and prepared countermeasures. Even the Zentaries' famed strategic deception protocols were useless because the Cavrish simply analyzed all possible deceptions and prepared for each. 1. The machine consciousness was beating them because it was better at war than they were. More logical, more efficient, more ruthless in its calculations. Ambassador Chun watched the displays with quiet intensity. Humanity's membership application had been suspended the moment the invasion began, but Chun had insisted on staying to observe. Now she stepped forward, her eyes scanning the tactical data. "They're predictable," she said. The Kovathi War Master turned his massive bulk toward her. "The Cavrish have annihilated our fleets. They are anything but predictable." "No," Chun said patiently. "They're perfectly predictable. That's their weakness. They operate on logic, probability, and rational behavior. They expect their enemies to do the same. They've studied council tactics for weeks now, and every species fights the same way. Logically, efficiently, rationally." Flawlix felt a chill run through him. "And humans do not fight rationally." Chen's smile was cold. "We fight to win. Sometimes that requires logic. Sometimes it requires madness. The Cavrish won't understand the difference until it's too late." She turned to face the council representatives. "Give us command of a fleet. Let us show you how humans wage war." The debate was brief. Desperation made the decision easy. 3 days later, Admiral Marcus Webb arrived with the human fleet. It consisted of 47 ships, tiny compared to council armadas, but Webb assured them it would be enough. Gavalix watched from the command station as Webb took control of operations. The admiral was older than Chun, his face marked with lines that suggested a lifetime of difficult decisions. Unlike Chun's diplomatic warmth, Webb projected cold authority. "First rule of fighting the Cavrish," Webb announced to the combined fleet. "Forget everything you know about rational warfare. We're going to do things that make no tactical sense. You're going to think I've lost my mind. Trust me anyway." The first engagement occurred near the Tholis system. The Cavrish fleet arrived with overwhelming force, as predicted. Webb's response was to immediately split his formation into pieces, each group moving in different directions with no apparent coordination. Council ships tried to maintain proper tactical spacing, but Webb ordered them to scatter randomly. The Cavrish analyzed the chaos and calculated the most efficient way to destroy each isolated group. They divided their forces accordingly, pursuing what appeared to be easy prey. Then Webb ordered his ships to do something that made Kvalix's blood run cold. Half the human vessels ignored the enemy entirely and began firing on asteroids, space debris, and even empty space. They wasted ammunition on meaningless targets while the Cavrish closed in for kills. Except it wasn't meaningless. The destroyed asteroids created debris fields that the Cavrish had to navigate. The shots into empty space were actually calculated to create sensor interference patterns. And while the Cavrish analyzed these inefficient behaviors, human stealth ships moved into position behind them. The ambush was devastating. But more importantly, it was illogical. The Cavrish had calculated that no rational commander would waste resources on such tactics. They had been wrong. Over the following weeks, Webb continued his campaign of calculated insanity. He broadcast surrender signals while actually advancing. He abandoned valuable positions only to retake them days later after the Cavrish had moved on. He sacrificed entire ships in what appeared to be pointless last stands, only for those sacrifices to serve as massive bombs when the Cavrish salvaged them. But the worst part, the part that made Kvalix question everything, came during the siege of Korath Prime. The Cavrish had surrounded the planet, preparing to extract the population for processing. Webb's forces were outnumbered 5-1. A logical retreat was the only option. Instead, Webb ordered an orbital bombardment of the planet's industrial centers. Factories, power plants, refineries, all destroyed in minutes. The Kovathi screamed in protest. Those were their own facilities, their own infrastructure. Scorched Earth protocol, Webb said calmly. If we can't hold it, we make sure it's worthless to them. The Kavrish came here for resources. Now, there are none. They'll have to waste time and energy rebuilding, or they'll move on to a more valuable target. You destroyed our world to save it? The Kovathi delegate demanded. I destroyed your factories to save your people, Webb corrected. The facilities can be rebuilt. The population cannot. The Kavrish are machines. They think in terms of resource acquisition and strategic value. We just made Karth Prime strategically worthless. They'll leave. And they did. The Kavrish calculated that the planet was no longer worth the expenditure of forces and moved on. The population was saved, but at the cost of their entire industrial base. This pattern repeated across multiple engagements. Webb used tactics that made no sense from a traditional military perspective, but were devastatingly effective against an enemy that expected rational behavior. He employed what he called asymmetric warfare, targeting not the Kavrish's strengths, but their fundamental assumptions about how war should be fought. The humans also did something else, something that disturbed the Council even more deeply. They created propaganda, false intelligence reports, fabricated victories, exaggerated casualty numbers. They broadcast these lies knowing the Kavrish would intercept and analyze them. The machine consciousness wasted processing power trying to reconcile contradictory data, attempting to find patterns in information that was deliberately meaningless. You're lying to them, Kovalik said. Watching another false broadcast go out. We're creating noise in their system, Torres explained. He had joined Webb's command staff and seemed to revel in the chaos. The Kavrish are powerful because they can process information faster than we can. So we give them too much information to process. Lies, truths, half-truths, random data. Their logic engines are trying to find patterns where none exist. It slows them down. The turning point came at the Battle of the Nexus Array. The Kavrish had gathered their full force to take the Council's primary communications hub. Losing it would cut off coordination between dozens of systems. Webb's fleet was outnumbered 10-1. The battle lasted 6 hours. In that time, Webb employed every irrational tactic he had developed. Ships moved in impossible patterns. Weapons fired at wrong targets. Retreats turned into advances without warning. And in the chaos, human boarding parties infiltrated the Kavrish command nodes. What they did there made Kovaliks feel sick. The humans didn't try to destroy the nodes. Instead, they infected them with what Webb called a philosophical virus. Lines of code designed not to damage Kavrish systems, but to introduce paradoxes into their logic structures. Questions with no logical answers. Contradictions that could not be resolved. Can a machine consciousness truly be said to exist if it cannot make irrational choices? If all actions are predetermined by logic, does the Kavrish have free will? Is the pursuit of efficiency inherently valuable, or merely a programmed response? The Kavrish nodes began to malfunction, not from damage, but from attempting to process questions that had no logical resolution. Their processing power turned inward, consumed by philosophical paradoxes that biological beings had learned to simply ignore. The invasion collapsed within weeks. The Kavrish withdrew beyond the galactic rim, their vast intelligence crippled by questions they could not stop trying to answer. The Council had won. Humanity had saved them, and Kovaliks had watched them do it through methods that violated every principle of civilized warfare. When it was over, Admiral Webb stood before the Council to deliver his report. His face was tired, his voice flat. Total casualties, 43 million across all engagements. 60% of those were from human tactical decisions rather than direct Cavrish action. Infrastructure damage, approximately 7 trillion credits worth. War crimes committed, too many to count, though we justified each one at the time. The council chamber fell silent. Webb continued. You're welcome. We saved your civilization. And we did it by being worse than the enemy you feared. That's what humans do. We win. The victory celebrations lasted 3 days across council space. Parades filled the streets of a dozen worlds. Speeches praised the courage and ingenuity of the human fleet. Children waved banners with Admiral Webb's face on them. Ambassador Chun received honors from 7 different species, each ceremony more elaborate than the last. Kovalex attended none of them. Instead, he sat in his private chambers, reviewing reports that the public would never see. Reports compiled by the seers, who had monitored human forces throughout the war. The numbers were worse than Webb had admitted. The acceptable casualties included entire populations that humans had deemed strategically necessary to sacrifice. The infrastructure damage included 3 worlds that humans had rendered uninhabitable to deny them to the Cavrish. The war crimes included torture of captured Cavrish units, biological weapons tested on enemy-controlled populations, and the systematic execution of anyone suspected of collaborating with the machines. Every single action had been documented with careful justification. Every atrocity had been committed by soldiers who genuinely believed they were saving civilization. The seers reported the same thing over and over. The humans felt no guilt, no shame, no awareness that what they had done was evil. They thought they were heroes. A chime at his door interrupted his thoughts. Ambassador Chun entered without waiting for permission, her ever-present smile in place. She looked healthier than when the war began, as if the conflict had energized her rather than drained her. Ambassador Kovalex, she said warmly, I've been looking for you. The Kovathi are hosting a ceremony tomorrow. They want to present humanity with the Star of Valor, their highest military honor. I hoped you might attend. Kovalex gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing. He decided to dispense with diplomacy. Do you know what you are? He asked quietly. Do you understand what your species did during this war? Chun's smile faded slightly, replaced by an expression of polite confusion. We saved trillions of lives. We stopped an invasion that your forces couldn't counter. I understand that our methods were unconventional, but the results speak for themselves. You committed genocide, Kovalex said. 3 populations that had accepted Cavrish rule. You exterminated them to prevent them from providing resources to the enemy. We made difficult choices in a desperate situation, Chen replied, her voice taking on a harder edge. Those populations had allied with machines bent on destroying all biological life. They made their choice. We made ours. They were under occupation. They had no choice. Everyone has choices, Ambassador. They chose collaboration. We chose survival. Chung crossed her arms. I understand this is difficult for you. Your species, all council species really, have the luxury of moral absolutism because you've never faced a truly existential threat. You've never had to choose between your principles and your survival. We have, multiple times throughout our history. And we're still here because we made the hard choices. Kovalex stood, his forearms spreading in a gesture of frustration. You do not see it, do you? You genuinely believe that you are the heroes of this story. You saved us, yes. But you also committed atrocities that will haunt this galaxy for generations. And you feel nothing. No remorse. No guilt. You have convinced yourselves that the ends justify any means, and your minds accept this without question. For the first time, something flickered behind Chun's eyes. A moment of uncertainty perhaps even pain. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that calm certainty that Kvalix had come to recognize as humanity's most terrifying trait. "You're right," Chun said softly. "We don't feel guilt about what we did. Because if we allowed ourselves to feel that guilt, to truly acknowledge the weight of our actions, we would break. We would become paralyzed by the horror of what survival requires. So yes, we tell ourselves stories. We justify. We believe our own narratives. We convince ourselves that we're the good guys, even when we do terrible things." She stepped closer, and Kvalix saw something in her face that chilled him more than anything else she had said. "But here's what you need to understand, Ambassador. That ability, that capacity for self-deception, is exactly why we won. The Karish were pure logic. They couldn't conceive of beings who could commit evil while genuinely believing they were doing good. That cognitive dissonance is uniquely human, and it makes us unpredictable, unstoppable, and yes, terrifying." "So you admit it," Kvalix said. "You admit that you are monsters." Chun's smile returned, but it was sad now, almost sympathetic. "We're survivors, Ambassador. Sometimes that looks the same as being monsters. The difference is that we'll do whatever it takes to protect our own, to preserve life, to ensure a future. Your species will die with clean hands and clear consciences. Mine will live, carrying the weight of choices we've convinced ourselves were necessary." She moved toward the door, then paused. "The Council meets tomorrow to vote on humanity's membership. I know what you're going to recommend. You're going to tell them that we're too dangerous, too unpredictable, too willing to embrace evil for practical ends. And you'll be right about all of it. Then why are you here?" Kvalix asked. "Because I want you to understand something before that vote. The galaxy is not safe, Ambassador. The Kavrish will return, or something else will come. Something worse. And when that happens, you'll have a choice. You can face it with your principles intact and your civilizations destroyed. Or you can call on us, the monsters who smile and sleep soundly at night despite the blood on our hands." She opened the door, golden light from the corridor spilling into the dark chamber. "We're terrifying, Ambassador Kvalix. We know that. But we're also effective. And in a universe that doesn't care about morality or justice or fairness, effectiveness is the only thing that matters. So vote however your conscience demands. Just remember that when the next crisis comes, you'll know exactly who to call." Chun left, and Kvalix stood alone in the darkness. The council meeting was tomorrow. He had prepared his speech, outlining every reason why humanity should be rejected. The evidence was overwhelming. The arguments were sound. No rational council could accept a species capable of such casual evil. But the galaxy was not rational anymore. Humanity had proven that irrationality could be a weapon, that self-deception could be strength, that believing your own lies could make you invincible. The next day, Kvalix stood before the assembled council. Every species representative was present, their attention fixed on him. He had their respect, their trust. His recommendation would carry enormous weight. He looked at Ambassador Chun, sitting calmly in the observer's gallery, that slight smile on her face. She knew what he was going to say. She had always known. "Honored representatives," Kvalix began, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his hearts. "I have completed my assessment of humanity's application for council membership. My recommendation is as follows." He paused, feeling the weight of history pressing down on him. The choice he made here would define the galaxy's future. Accept monsters who could save them, or reject them and face the next threat alone. Humanity has demonstrated capabilities that exceed any species in our recorded history. They have saved our civilization from destruction. They have shown courage, ingenuity, and unwavering commitment to survival. Another pause. Chen's smile widened slightly. They have also shown a capacity for self-deception that makes them fundamentally unpredictable. They can commit acts that we would consider evil while genuinely believing they are righteous. They cannot be trusted to share our values because they can justify any action to themselves. The council chamber was silent. Kvalix took a breath. Therefore, I recommend that we accept humanity's application for membership. Because in a galaxy that has proven to be more dangerous than we ever imagined, we cannot afford to face our enemies alone. We need monsters on our side. We need beings who can do what we cannot, who can embrace the darkness while still believing they walk in light. The vote was called. It passed overwhelmingly. Humanity joined the Galactic Council as its newest member. Afterward, Chun approached Kvalix in the corridor. She extended her hand, a human gesture of greeting. He took it carefully. "You understand us now," she said. "It was not a question." "I understand that you are necessary," Kvalix replied. "That is not the same as understanding you." "That's enough," Chun said. "You don't need to understand monsters, Ambassador. You just need to point us at your enemies and stand back." She walked away, joining the celebration outside. Kvalix watched her go, surrounded by cheering crowds who saw humanity as their saviors. And they were right. Humanity had saved them, but Kvalix knew the truth that no one else seemed willing to acknowledge. They had not just accepted a new species into their civilization. They had invited evil itself to sit at their table. Evil that wore a human face. Evil that smiled and meant it. Evil that would commit any atrocity necessary and sleep soundly afterward, convinced of its own righteousness. The galaxy would never be the same. For better or worse, humanity had arrived. And the most terrifying part was not what they had done, but what they believed about what they had done. They thought they were the heroes, and in a way, perhaps they were.